Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Reverend Father Dionysius Vaz S.J., Provincial of Karnataka Jesuit Province, and the Samagra team, headed by Reverend Father Brian Pereira S.J., I extend a warm welcome to one and all present here to this webinar series on mental health and the pandemic. I'm Dr. Rekha Ahuja from St. Joseph's Evening College, and I'm also involved with coordinating the activities of Samagra. We are very fortunate to have with us today our esteemed resource persons, both very senior people in the field of mental health. Allow me to introduce our speakers for today. Dr. Matthew Verghese is currently a senior professor of psychiatry in the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS, Bangalore. He has been a faculty at NIMHANS for 35 years. He was the head Department of Psychiatry from 2013 to 16. And from 2017 onwards, he is the head of the Geriatric Psychiatry Department. He is a senior member involved in clinical services, training and research in geriatric psychiatry, adult psychiatry, and community psychiatry. He has been supervising couple and family therapy and individual therapy for over 30 years now. He's a member of research groups and professional societies and has over 150 publications, including the National Mental Health Survey 2016 and Dementia India Report 2010. Matthew, sir, we are indeed very privileged to have you here with us today and to hear from you. We welcome you, sir, to this webinar.
Thank you very much, Rekha.
We also have with us Dr. Girish Nagaraj Rao, Professor of Epidemiology, Center for Public Health at NIMHANS. Dr. Girish N., a medical graduate with a postgraduate degree in community medicine, is trained in epidemiological methods. He has been associated with nearly 60 research projects at NIMHANS since the past decade. The activities have ranged from doing independent research to being a co-investigator to guiding student research at undergraduate, postgraduate, super specialty, and the doctoral levels. The key areas of research have been geriatric mental health, maternal mental health, alcohol epidemiology, health economics, and community mental health. The focus has been on health systems with a public health perspective. With the penchant for teaching, he handles courses like public health management and administration and mental health, mental, neurological, and substance use disorders at NIMHANS. He has 75 research communications and research monographs, including 17 research papers related to substance use and many monographs and research reports. Dr. Girish was the co-investigator for the India component of the World Mental Health Survey Bangalore study, the burden of headache disorders in India study, and the harms to others from alcohol use, India country study phase 1 and 2, socioeconomic impact of alcohol, patterns of and consequences of alcohol misuse in India, Bangalore injury, road traffic injury surveillance program, among many others. He is currently the co-principal investigator for 3 large-scale research endeavors of eminence in the country, namely National Mental Health Survey, the second largest survey globally on mental health, along with 2 longitudinal cohort studies on dementia. These are just few of our esteemed members' achievements that I have listed, and we are indeed grateful. Girish, sir, we also welcome you to the webinar today. Thank you for joining us. This webinar series is an initiative by Samagra, Karnataka Jesuits Mental Health Care. Samagra is a team of mental health professionals, and during these pandemic times, we are coordinating our activities with the Karnataka Jesuit province across all of its institutions to offer mental health care and support. Therefore, to create more awareness and initiate dialogues on crucial topics relating to mental health, we approached Dr. Matthew and his team of colleagues from NIMHANS to share their expertise and insight with us. They have very kindly put together these topics for us in the form of the webinar series that we are starting today, and we are eagerly looking forward to interacting with all of them. Each speaker will make a presentation for about 15 minutes today, and we will then open the floor for discussion, questions, and answers. I request all the participants to keep their audios mute and the videos off during the webinar. If you have any questions, kindly post them in the chat box. We will make note and address them at the end. Without further ado, let us now invite our resource persons to take over. First, I would like to invite Dr. Girish. Sir, you can start. So you can start sharing your screen.
Okay. Am I visible?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Rekha and the entire team. Thank you for inviting us and making us part of this entire endeavor. As we continue to say, there is no health without mental health. And that is where this gets a bit more dearer and special to us. Without wasting much time, let's jump into the topic. Well, I'm sure this is the digital photograph which we start framing day in, day out since the last 1 year or so, trying to track how many cases are there, how many deaths, how many discharged, what is the testing status. I think digital age has made a big difference, but this is something which we need to possibly keep track of, which is where is the bigger issue in terms of looking at the impact of this COVID epidemic on public health. A Chota virus, about 125 nanomicrons, has opened up a huge fault lines in our entire health and public health systems. Now, this is what is the impact of this large COVID, as we can say, a pandemic. Well, this figure shows or throws up the larger issue what we are facing. Look at February, March, what was 0, suddenly it has zoomed, and then what we can see is either in terms of cases, deaths, or new cases or new deaths, what we see is an unprecedented rise in the numbers. Well, it has surpassed all past annual tolls what we could think of, including possibly tuberculosis, very nearer to in terms of deaths. But that's what it is. It is something new and something which has taken us by surprise completely. It is in this context that I would like to look at addressing the public in public health. What do we mean by public health? We talk about the art and science of preventing ill health, promoting health, to organized community efforts. So we are looking at organizing the community, facilitating them to organize and take forward so that we are preventing ill health and promoting health. Unfortunately, the public in this entire debate of public health often gets missed out. And that is where we thought we should put more focus into the public in this public health, especially when we're talking about an unprecedented crisis like the COVID pandemic. Let's quickly go through some of the basics. I'm sure all of you are aware about it, but more for keeping track of. COVID is CO, corona, VI virus. D is the disease, year of origin. Possibly came first on 31st December, and on 12th January 2020, a new virus was identified. On 30th January, it was declared as something of international concern. It's a very technical definition. It became a public health importance of international concern. It just said that it has crossed the boundaries. Now, by 17th March, it had spread to several countries across the globe, and currently we are having more than 200 countries which are affected by the pandemic. In India, the first case was on 27 January 2020, and less than a year, by end of just about a year or so, May 2021, we have got nearly about 2.8 crore cases in the country. This is not a new virus. It belongs to a large family of viruses causing diseases of varying severity, from a simple disease as a common cold to more severe disease as the Middle East respiratory syndrome or severe acute respiratory syndrome. The family of these viruses identified first in 1960, and what we are looking at is most of us would have got it by the time we pass childhood. Well, this is one of the images of the viruses which was for electron photomicrograph in the beginning, somewhere in January 30th, 2020. As I said earlier, these belong to the rhino virus. Three set of broad symptoms, generalized symptoms, respiratory symptoms, and also, not surprisingly, GI symptoms. That is gastrointestinal tract, like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, which is what some of them are complaining now. Well, these are the two major syndromes which we are talking about of late. I'm sure you have heard about them, ILI and SARI. ILI is not the ILI of Kannada, and SARI is not the SARI of whatever we talk about. ILI is influenza-like illness, and SARI is severe acute respiratory infection. Let me not bore you with the details. I'm sure you would come across these again. The slide set would be with you. What we are worried about is the transmissibility of COVID-19. What we know for sure is transmission is mainly person to person through close contact and or airborne transmission. Airborne transmission is now accepted of late, and it has been given credible evidence. Precise interval during which the infection can be transmitted is uncertain, but as with other viruses, potential to do so is highest in the early course of the illness. After 7 to 10 days, the transmission is unlikely. Not that it is rare. Secondary attack rate is 15%, that is from one person to the other. So 85% of them do miss out. So which is what we need to keep in mind. Just because an individual is with another person who has got corona does not mean that the person will get. It depends on the type and duration of exposure, use of preventive measures like mask or any other methodology used, and several other individual factors like amount of virus in the respiratory secretions, because it again varies. Which is why most of the secondary infections or the infection among the primary contacts have been more among household contacts or in healthcare settings or in congregations. And that is why we are talking about coronaviruses and super spreader events. What we also need to note is there is no evidence suggesting animals, including domesticated, as a major source of infection in human beings. Well, the first case, the zero case is yet to be identified or precisely defined. Respiratory droplets and airborne transmission is what we are looking at. Human to human transmission is the major source, which is where we need to look at this important concept in public health, that is the chain of transmission. If we are able to break the chain of transmission, any one amongst this, then possibly we are breaking the whole infection. We need to have the infectious agent. They need to reside somewhere. They need to escape from that. That is a portal of exit. Reservoir in this sense becomes the lung. Portal of exit can be the nose, mouth, or very rarely eye. Mode of transmission, that is how it is transmitted, airborne or through droplets. Portal of entry, again, mouth, ear, and nose. The susceptible host, and then the infectious agent multiplies again. So only if all these links are connected, then an infection is established. Breaking any one link will stop the disease transmission. And this is what we are trying to look at. However, the first thing, because it was a new virus, we did not know what is to be done. At the first instance, what we did was a lockdown, which was a bigger, taking a bludger to handle this small virus. but that gave us a lot more comfort in terms of preparing for the next set of activities in terms of management, that is testing, tracing, tracking, treatment, and teamwork, which is said to be the 5 T's for COVID-19 management. We also developed algorithms as to what needs to be done so that this testing, tracing, and treatment can get more streamlined. Not recommended, you can be as normal. If it is recommended, stay isolated at home and follow instructions. If you are positive, then you need to consult. Just a minute. If you are asymptomatic or mildly symptoms, you have a different set of treatment. And if you've got critical symptoms, that is when you start getting into admission. Now, this is where, please understand these two different terminologies. Quarantine is something which is for healthy persons and we restrict their activities or we separate them from others so that they are not ill, but they are potentially ill so that they may be not transmitting the illness. Isolation is for those people who have been specifically positive. This we need to keep in mind. Now, it is in this context, contact tracing becomes a very, very important thing for either symptomatic or asymptomatic. All people who have come into contact should be advised 7 days of home quarantine, because it is in these 7 days that people can develop symptoms in case they are susceptible. Primary contacts and secondary contacts need to be tested. Now, which is where once after testing, to reduce the transmission, what we are looking at is this concept of containment zone. If there are 5 or more cases of COVID in an apartment building or housing society or anywhere, we need to see that area remains a containment, that is, no people can move in and out of that area, so that the area remains isolated or that entire virus is contained within that particular zone till 14 days of the last positive case or the last primary secondary contacts are identified. Prevention again is aimed at reducing the transmission. It is both possible and feasible. What we are looking at is primarily infection control in healthcare settings and particularly use of personal preventive measures. Now, this is where comes the bigger issue in terms of what is it the public can take care of. Public can handle themselves with respect to the pandemic. Wearing of masks is the key thing when we are talking about the COVID-19 pandemic management. Yes, we are talking about 3 measures. One is hand wash, hand hygiene. Second one is wearing of mask. And third one is social distancing. But of these 3, I would put more focus on wearing of masks. And the WHO recommendation is, this is the first line. Non-medical fabric masks can also be used, which would reduce the risk of transmission. I will not bore you with these. I'm sure you have heard a lot about these things. There are advantages. There are risks also, because if you don't use these masks properly, you can contaminate yourself despite protecting. Also, given the Indian context, it can result in a false sense of security. What we need to, this is where I would like to look at and bring it to your attention, the correct way of wearing a mask. Respiratory etiquette and hygiene. This is to see that you don't sprinkle the virus around, cover the mouth and mouth with tissue or any cloth, turn the head away, sneeze or cough into your elbow so that that doesn't come into contact with either your mouth, ear or nose whenever you cough or sneeze. Next is in terms of cleaning your hands with alcohol and soap. So again, breaking the chain of transmission in any way. What we are looking at here is in terms of portal of exit and mode of transmission, and also portal of entry and mode of transmission. If you are breaking it here at the exit and entry point, I think we have made a good success. Contact tracing is one key issue. What we need to be looking at is not all contacts are high risk. There are low risk contacts also, and we need to understand when we touch body fluids, when we have a direct physical contact, live in the same household, close proximity, that is when the risk becomes greater. Which is why nearly 80 to 85% of the COVID-19 cases are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic. Because of use of mask and other protective devices, the burden or the quantum of virus which we have possibly taken in gets reduced a lot. It is this context that public vastly overestimates the risk of hospitalization, because even the mildest symptoms provokes us to think about the severe issues which possibly we will face. Check for the following symptoms: fever, cough, cold, or any of these. Look for thermal scanning for fever, fingertip pulse oximetry. In case your blood sugar, you're diabetic, look at blood sugar and blood pressure measurement, and then a triage is required. So you are then declared suitable for isolation and home care. 85 to 90% of them do require most of the time home isolation or only home care. It's only those less than 5% who need to be shifted to a COVID care center or to a COVID hospital. The other biggest issue of which we have got in our armamentarium is the vaccine. I'm sure all of you know that 2 vaccines are available. Please forget about the different debates about it. Any vaccine is good, because otherwise they would not have come into the market. Don't go to mixed vaccine as of now, because that's an ongoing scientific inquiry. All vaccines will protect the individual against the severe forms of the disease. Milder forms is what we are debating about the numbers: 75%, 78%, 82%. You can give any number you want depending on the number of people tested, but all vaccines protect. But again, with a caveat, I'll come to a couple of these slides. This is the history of vaccination. I think India has done tremendously well in terms of rolling out the vaccination. Because of our huge population, possibly there has been slip-ups, but on a relative note, we have done well. Our public health systems, despite crashing down very heavily, have been able to live up to the expectations. This is where is what we have not been able to tackle, is this infodemic. Infodemic is excessive amount of information, overabundance of this information, which is not information, but misinformation and disinformation, which is harmful to people's physical and mental health. And importantly, it increases stigmatization and prevents people from taking further steps. Which is why we are talking about super spreading events. These are some issues which I would just like to highlight and bring it to the discussion point, because at some point of time they said, should we decontaminate paper, all those issues. But contaminated surfaces is a potential source, but true in terms of its potential only when there is heavy viral contamination. Otherwise, it can be safe. How do people turn out to be RT-PCR positive even after 10 days? Yes, dead viruses are there. There is prolonged viral detection. And this is exactly the point which is why the government of India stopped looking at repeat RT-PCR after 10 days after isolation or after treatment. The other issue is in terms of vaccine hesitancy, mutations of concern, and then indirect contact. I just thought I should flag out all these issues for discussion, and then we'll take up one or more of these as and when time permits. Well, the key issue, as I was telling in terms of infodemic, is these reports which come up, which sort of indicate that link up to different events and then talk about or scare people. Now, researcher dies of COVID-19 in Karnataka after getting 2 doses of vaccine. This was in the month of January, but the person got infected in April. Let's know that vaccines are not 100% effective. There is a minor risk, but we should not blow up this 1% risk to say that vaccines are totally not effective. Sensationalism in that sense is the biggest difficulty what we are facing today. We did a small study in terms of looking at what the Kannada newspapers talk about, whether they talk about breaking the chain of transmission. Well, since January 2020, COVID-19 has been the news. From a dominant front page feature in March 2020, was the only newsmaker in April. Rightly so, the underlying message was that of a growing health crisis and the heroic steps that were being taken. Were they alarmist or sensationalized? Found it difficult to arrive at a conclusion, but looking at people and how they responded, we found that it was very difficult to, despite all these alarmist messages which went out, people in the rural areas, in the far-fetched areas, still did not heed to that simple issue of wearing masks. Well, I would like to recommend you to this YouTube series from Karnataka government, Jagruti Karnataka. This is a whole set of programs which there are, as you can see, 125 videos on various aspects of COVID-19, including about the second wave. So I would recommend you to have a look at it. So I will just stop here. Hope I have tickled your brains much more. And let's look at bringing up several of these issues to the fore. So let's put the corona pandemic management back into public health so that people can take control. Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you, Dr. Girish. That was indeed quite a bit of information to tickle our brains. I now invite Dr. Matthew to take over and let us hear from our next speaker for today. Thank you.
I'm just beginning to share my screen, Rekha. So,
yes, sir.
did you stop sharing, Girish?
Yes, sir. I have stopped sharing.
For some reason, my share is not coming.
Dr. Matthew, you can try loading. Yeah.
Now it's coming. Yeah, so thank you very much to Rekha and the St. Joseph's institutions for having us talk to all of you about this. The main purpose of preparing a webinar series for the next few weeks was basically to create awareness among the whole group of institutions that you have. And we put together this program so that you can get an overview of what happens. And this first talk, which is basically the public health approach, is I think very important to give an overview. That's the reason, though you might have heard many of the things that Girish talked about, the response actually is from all of us. The public is us. So it's not enough that you say the government did this and the government did that. All of us as citizens, members of the college, members of our families, as individuals, we have to be responsible. That is a huge responsibility and a huge information that we need to know. So Girish has talked about the public health approach to corona and what needs to be done. And that is very much important in what I'm going to talk about, because a lot of things that he talked about impinge on how we are going to tackle the mental health component of COVID. And I basically want to leave you with a message where we are talking about a pyramid of care, where we will talk about primary and secondary prevention and the strategies that are used for prevention. So this will be an overview, and my colleagues who come later on from tomorrow and next week onwards will cover each of these smaller components in greater detail. So, as all of you know, the strategies for action in the country have been majorly at a national level, some of it at a governmental and a community level in terms of prevention, healthcare delivery. Tertiary care centers have been very active because the hospitals and the health system has been very active. We've had very large-scale national policies. The disaster management agency has been very much active, and but at the institution level, I think hospitals have been very much active. But what needs to happen is at institution levels like yours, like say the group of colleges, and very much so at our family level and individual level, we really need to be vigilant and aware of what needs to be done. This is the WHO pyramid that I talked about. If you can see the bottom of the pyramid is high in terms of need and frequency. We must all be doing this bottom, which is the self-care. So, for example, if you say that you want to prevent heart disease in a large community or a country, you will advise everybody to do physical exercise, watch your weight, take care of blood pressure and hypertension, and so on. And that will actually prevent heart disease. So, similarly, the maximum thing that you can do, and which is low cost but high need, is at the bottom of the pyramid, and that is self-care and informal community care. And that is what we can all do as communities. Now, if you come to the top part, which is psychiatric care and going into hospitals, that is really tertiary care, which is high cost, and it's not something that the majority of population will require. Now, if you look at this pyramid, which is taken specifically for disasters, and this is from the IAC, the Interagency Standing Committee guidelines, which the WHO has adopted. And these guidelines are common for all pandemics and all disasters. So if you can see at the bottom, social considerations in basic services and security. So basically it's advocacy for basic services, socially appropriate and protective dignity and behavior. And then going further up, strengthening the community and family supports, you need to activate the social networks, activate community traditional supports, and support child-friendly spaces. And then go up a little further to basic healthcare by, it can be basic doctors, or it can also be by community workers or counselors. So all of you can become buddies or counselors to other people. And that is what is important, and that's what we're going to tell you in the next few weeks. Now, when you get to the top of the pyramid, specialized services, that is really too much. And all of you cannot handle it. That is when referral happens, and that is required only for a small population of the country. Now, we talk about prevention. The one level we talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention, but I will not talk so much about secondary and tertiary prevention because that mainly covers what we do in a medical setup. But you must remember about primary prevention, which is basically, one is universal, which I said, countrywide, community-wide, which talks about education, public awareness, and trying to prevent infection by doing things in the community. All the things that Girish said about distancing, about masking, and so on, and our own behavior that we must adopt, and that is the universal prevention to prevent the disease. Selective preventions target vulnerable groups. For example, we've heard of how elders in our homes must be careful for them. Adults who have got chronic illnesses, people who are not vaccinated now, socially isolated and marginalized people, the poor, the people from areas where they cannot isolate, for example, from the slums and the lower socioeconomic status. And indicated prevention, where you are trying to identify people early. So you're trying to pick up symptoms early. So we will teach you in the course of the next few weeks about how to pick up symptoms among each other. For example, depression, anxiety. What do you do to pick up early symptoms, and how can we intervene? How can all of us intervene without actually taking to the doctor in the first place? So you can do self-help, you can manage fear, stress, boredom, anxiety with counseling programs and training counselors. And this is something that all of us can do. So I will sort of talk a little bit about this kind of prevention. So for universal prevention, we already heard Girish talking about how we can protect ourselves and protect others. So you can protect others from getting sick if you are infected, and if you can protect yourself by washing, distancing, and mainly, as Girish said, then the current recommendation is mainly that you mask. Masking is the most effective. Looking after yourself is also important. For example, when you are in isolation, when the whole country is on lockdown, you need to watch for yourself. You need to eat properly. You need to exercise regularly. I know people talk about you can't go out and walk because of lockdown, but there is actually no prevention of walking down in your compound or walking down in the open streets with a mask on. That is very much recommended, and you must do it. Nobody can stop you doing that. You must sleep adequately. You have a tendency to sit and watch the TV, watch either Netflix or Prime or news that's going on, and worry yourself and lose sleep. And sleeping adequately is very important for improving your immunity. You need to keep in touch. With lockdowns, you can't go and visit, but you need to keep in touch on social media, on phones, on emails, video sessions, and so on. I know that many people have connected, many alumni associations, many families have connected all over the world with video conferencing. You need to minimize your news intake. You need to see less and less of news and only take information from the trusted sources. Maybe the Government of India website or the CDC or the WHO website. And really, you should not be following other things which are not. There are all kinds of rumors and myths about what you can do, you cannot do. People talk about steam inhalation. People talk about, yoga improving nitrous oxide. There's all kinds of things. Taking certain homeopathic preparations. I mean, there are so many things. I mean, the WhatsApp university or the YouTube university is doing more harm than good. And above all, you need to avoid things which you can get addicted to, which is tobacco, alcohol, various drugs, and also internet addiction. And these things are going to be covered in great detail in the subsequent session that we will have. You need to mind your mind. You need to take care of your mind. And this is all part of universal prevention. And some of it is also part of selective prevention. So for example, with the people at risk, maybe elders, maybe children, you need to do some of these things. You need to remain connected. You need to remain busy. So connected means socializing with other people, not in physical space, but otherwise socializing. You need to keep busy. Very important to follow a daily routine. So many times you are doing work from home. So children are at home, you are at home. You need a separate space. They need a separate space and computer time. So you need to have a regular daily routine. Fixed times for meals, fixed times for recreation, fixed times for sleeping. That is very important. Many times when you're at home, you forget to keep a regular routine. You need to help others in the house. Ask them if they need anything. Ask them whether they need something emotionally. These things are very important. Recreation is very important. Listening to music, watching programs, being with the family, playing board games, doing puzzles or cooking together. And you need to be cognizant of your own mental status. You ask yourself, okay, this is the crazy thing that all of us are going through. It is an abnormal normal. So how do I feel? Do I feel fearful? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel depressed? Am I not sleeping? And then talk to other people about it. Don't keep it in your own head. And it's very important to also talk about it and also ask other people about it. So there are various things like this which you can see on the net. You can see pamphlets from the WHO on excess abuse of the video, alcohol, screen time, substance use, how to cope with it, and so on, which again will be covered in subsequent sessions. Some more details on selective prevention. I spoke to you about identifying vulnerable groups. Now, these are adults who are not vaccinated, who have chronic diseases like asthma, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, and so on. And also in the sphere of mental health, if they have had a prior mental illness, they are also susceptible. For example, if they had depression earlier, they've had anxiety earlier on, they might forget to take their medicines, or they might forget to go for counseling, and that might make them at risk. Similar thing with the youth, adolescents and youth, especially youth which are poorer, socially disadvantaged, marginalized, because they don't have the space. They don't have, many of them don't even have, so there is a big discrepancy here. For example, they may not be able to take part in virtual classrooms because they, times, poor people do it on a small cell phone, maybe a smartphone which somebody has given them. So there is a problem. There is definitely, these definitely a vulnerable group, and these are people who may not have a space, they may not have rooms, they may not have places to isolate, and so on. Elders are at risk, and in our homes, we must look after people in our own homes and protect them, and at the same time not sort of isolate them and keep them in a room and protect them that way. But we need to talk to them. So you need to plan specific targeted interventions and do a lot of self-help for management of fear, stress, boredom, anxiety. And you can do this in a buddy or teacher training program system where you can train yourselves, train counselors, and so on. Now, indicated preventions are basically when you try to pick up people who have early warning signs, early identification. And then you must pick them up and send them for counseling, or if it's more serious problem, you have to send them for to a mental health professional. So this you can easily see by students or staff getting absenteeing at work. They perform worse on academic or job performance and productivity. There might be rapid changes of mood in terms of, you might find them crying, you might find them sad, you might find they have anger outbursts. Sometimes they might report intoxicated to work. These are people who are not regularly intoxicated or taking drugs, but you might find them taking drugs during the day, or smoking or other things. You might find that they're forgetful or have difficulty concentration, and you might find them tired and physically incapable of doing a daily function. So as I mentioned, you can train lay volunteers, buddy volunteers, counselors, and so on. You can also use helplines in your college. You can have group discussions, so-called coffee shop, where you can actually meet in a distance with masks, or maybe a group discussion on what should be done. Now I'm going to talk in the next few slides about what the WHO, CDC, and the UGC have to say in terms of guidelines for colleges and schools. And this is, I think, very important, because this is something that all of you need to do. Whether you're locking or unlocking, this is something that you need to do. I know that all of you are aware now that you need to really evaluate the benefits and the demerits of closure or opening of an institution in terms of impact on education, impact on general health, well-being of students and families, the finance and economy, and also vulnerable populations. For example, many times in schools, poor students get their food and their other things from actually the schools. Then they come for midday meals and so on. So stopping schools might actually deprive them also of other things like socialization and nutrition. You need to think about the hours spent in the college. What is the day schedule? Are they boarding students? And then the management has to be different depending on that. You need to be aware of, does your college or does your school have adequate ventilated spaces? Are there environmental provisions? For example, can you apply these principles of distancing for 2 meters, masking, hand hygiene, sanitation? Do you have the provision to actually apply that? And do you have protocols in place if somebody is suspected positive? What are the plans? Can you identify the symptoms? Can you, as Girish said, test, trace, and then care and communicate that? Can you look at the equity and effectiveness of remote learning? Do you have a system for remote learning? Can you do virtual classrooms? And can all your students access virtual classrooms? And above all, you need to collaborate and coordinate with the public health system. So family members, community, everybody, the government, everybody has to come into the picture when you do this. Now, the environmental thing is very important. You must have an environment where your desk can be at a space of 2 meters. So that means reducing the classes, staging recesses in terms of meal timings, breaks, recreations, and exercise, limiting the number of classes. You might do alternative attendance. For example, some people coming on one day and not coming the other day. Good ventilation, I mentioned. And then above all, you need to be able to ensure the discipline of following all these norms. both for your students and for your staff. It's very, very easy to not follow the norms. And as you can see on the streets, when you go around, you can see that people are not following the norms. And that is the biggest spreader that, defeats all of us. As Girish mentioned, the moment you have more than 5 people in your college who are ill, then you become a containment zone. So it's a very small line that you're transgressing. What are public measures that you can take in a college? Decision to open or close, as you saw with the 12th board exams, the government took a decision not to have it. And I think that's a great decision, because I know a lot of people are upset, and I know a lot of people are going to, feel bad, because, people who want to do very well, are going to feel upset. But it depends. It depends on the control of transmission in the community, because college is after all a part of the community. So whether you have no cases or whether you have community infection, right now we are at a stage of community infection. That's why almost the whole country is on a partial lockdown. So obviously the colleges are closed. And you know what happened when the colleges and schools opened? In this way, actually, many of the families that I know, we know that it's the students who went to schools and colleges and came back and then gave it to a whole family. So infection among the adolescents and youth is same as the adults. Younger children, the infection might be less, but among the adolescents and youth, it's actually the same as adults. So people have to follow the same guidelines that adults follow. And we need to, of course, protect people who are at risk, as I mentioned. Now, prevention control measures, again, to continue at the community level, you can have early detection, testing, tracing, as Girish mentioned. And again, following all the guidelines of physical distancing, masking, hygiene. And very important to give information and dispel rumors. The government has a policy, and we have very clear practice in the last 1 year. That is a good thing that has happened. There are clear SOPs, there are clear infrastructure to protect all. Screening and care is also very much in place, and we know how to protect this high-risk population. And what Girish mentioned is that information and communication is very important, so that we don't have stigma and we dispel all rumors. This is a checklist for staff and parents in a college. You need to monitor the staff and students on a regular basis, so maybe temperature checks or things like that. We shouldn't ask a person to come to college if the person is having any symptoms of the illness, even without actually testing the person. Teaching and implementing good hygiene. Very important to have proper use of masks and respirating hygiene. This is the most important thing now, much more than cleaning surfaces. Waste has to be safely collected, stored, and disposed, giving correct information, asking questions, expressing feelings, addressing fear, anxiety, doubts of people. And we need to counsel everybody in a college or a family or an institution about the people who test positive. We saw in the first wave and the second wave that many times people in flats and other localities were ostracized because they're positive. And as I mentioned, we need to coordinate between family, college, and community. What are the benefits of reopening? Obviously, you'll finish studies and move on to the next level in terms of education. College is an essential service, and it's very important for the welfare of everybody concerned, especially the family and the parents. Prevention of behavioral problems in adolescents and youth can also be done by having college. You can prevent psychological problems, you can prevent violence, addictions, and very important for social and psychological well-being and development of the students and the family. But you must have access to reliable information, and obviously it's very important to family, society, for employment, growth, and development. Now, these are various support resources. I will not go over this, but there are resources for everything actually now on the website. You see the Ministry of Health website or the WHO website. You have things on basic psychosocial skills. You have something on social stigma. You have something on psychological first aid, which will be covered by tomorrow and the sessions after that. You have things on parenting. You have things on excessive screen use and gaming, and what to do in times of stress, what to do with alcohol, and how to manage substance abuse. So, as I mentioned, you can access any of these websites. NIMHANS, the Disaster Management Authority, has a website. NIMHANS has a psychosocial program for disasters. We have a helpline, and you can find many such help. And you as a college should also create a helpline where your students and faculty and staff can access. thank you very much, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you, sir. As you rightly said, both the sessions today were very informative and crucial to set the stage for all the further discussions that we are going to have. And it has given us a broad context about what we are discussing today, that is mental health in the pandemic situation. Responding to your comment just now about the helpline, we do have a helpline, sir, from Samagra, which we are extending to the community, to our staff and students primarily, and all the stakeholders associated with us. So thank you very much for to both the speakers, Dr. Girish and Dr. Matthew, for sharing your views. We have about 12 to 15 minutes for questions. We will quickly take some of them. I request the participants to post in the chat. In the meantime, I'm just sharing a feedback form to get feedback about what you thought about our program today and what you would like to hear from, or any other queries or suggestions you have. So let us, I'll propose the questions to both the speakers, and you all can decide who wants to respond. The first question is, when talking about public health, we often exclude the marginalized, especially the rural populations, may not be intentionally, but they may not have equal access. Do you think that rural public health needs another strategy from where they can address their concerns? And we as the urban public, how do we correspond with them?
Okay. Well, I think calling something as rural public health is something splitting hairs twice. So public health is public health. Public health is looking at organizing and looks at a systems view for healthcare. So in that sense, equity is part of the discussion in public health. Marginalized groups are part of the discussion in public health. If these people are excluded, then it does not become public health. So in that sense, a very strict definition of the terminology, marginalized communities or those in the rural areas are all part of the discussion in public health. The point what I wanted to bring forth is, many a times in the system, the public are not part of the debate or discussions. Or even if they are more in terms of a cursory involvement. Now, there are reasons for it. There are reasons for it because it is not very simplistic in terms of trying to talk about a health intervention. They are complex and several times complicated also. For them to understand the nuances, there is a requirement for them also to become more educated. For example, I was showing to you about these press reports. Now we know that vaccinations are not 100% effective. There is a chance of 1%, but people blow it up and then they seem to not understand that these are the difficulties. So in that sense, coming back to the question, yes, rural folks or those who are marginalized need to be part of the discussion. Now, the bigger issue what is happening is Corona has thrown up a lot of these. For example, let's look at health is not just in terms of giving medication. Health is also in terms of helping them sustain their livelihoods. If you're looking at it, the food and nutrition. Several citizens have come forward and become part of that group to see that those who are malnourished are not denied. At least that sort of nourishment, nutrition is taken care of. Several NGOs have come forward. For example, I think Matthew sir would support me on that. When people required medications, now they saw that it could be reached to them because it was, for whatever reason, they could not access. So in that sense, people have become active. People have become proactive, but there is still scope for further involvement of them. Matthew sir, would you like to add?
I just want to add something about the equity, especially with the poorer population. Take something much closer home. For example, when you talk about virtual classroom, my maid and her family, there are 2 children at home. They have been having virtual classroom for the last 1 year. They have one connection, and they use it on a cell phone. So what we need to do is to, there might be computers, desktops or laptops lying or tablets lying in our homes. And that is something which I've seen the community do in a big way this time. And that is something that I admire so much. The community has actually got together, whether it is a Sikh community or the Hindu community or the Christian community, they've all got together and done various things. Sometimes it's gone to an extreme of even getting oxygen cylinders and having oxygen tents, which I think might be a bit of a problem and might cause maybe mucormycosis. But that's an extreme. But giving food, giving computers, and making sure that people can actually work from home or study from home. And that is something that we have to really watch out in when you talk about equity. People are well off. It's very easy to say work from home or virtual classroom at home. Not easy.
Okay, sir. There's also a question in the chat box. We'll take that before this. There are two questions here on stigma. So there's one on what is the role of COVID stigma and how COVID is dealt with, and also related to that, how do we deal with the stigma surrounding mental health itself? So maybe both questions combined with COVID and mental health around stigma.
So many of us who are doctors, I know that during the first wave, many of us faced, not so much me because I'm a mental health professional and I don't really see COVID patients directly, but many people face stigma from their families and also from their, say for example, apartment complexes. Many times, one is that people did it to protect their families. They took up places close to the hospitals and then they stayed there throughout those 1 or 2 months. But in many places, apartment complexes and communities refuse to get people come. And that is because people are scared, just like people are scared in the past, maybe 30 years ago about HIV/AIDS. You thought that you would get HIV/AIDS from anywhere by shaking hands, by using the same toilet seat and so on, or going for a haircut. So lack of knowledge, lack of awareness about what is it that causes transmission leads to anxiety, fear, and you tend to ostracize people. So that is the kind of stigma that we need to avoid. During the second wave, I don't see so much of that happening. But in the second wave, what is happening is that people are beating up doctors because they think doctors are in some way responsible for killing their, their patient. That is an extreme where people are getting very upset and taking it out on the doctors. Obviously, doctors are trying to do their best, and there isn't enough oxygen, there isn't enough medical beds. What do you do? Stigma about mental illness is also the same. Now, mental illness is again something which is not palpable. You can't see it. If you see somebody going on the street who's crazy, then okay, that some person is mentally ill. But very few people know that about 10% of the population can have some kind of mental illness, whether it is depression, alcohol dependence, anxiety, or even a serious mental illness. And these are all diseases that can be treated. So many times when we fear somebody's behavior, when we don't know what can be done, that is what causes people to get stigmatized. Just like it happened with HIV, tuberculosis, leprosy, and so on. So it's very important to get information, educate yourself, and know what it is so that you prevent the fear and anxiety.
So just a very quick response. We are running out of time. There's one question in the chat which is asking about. We have a query. My father is suffering from motor neuron disease.
I've already replied to that.
All right.
That, okay. That you should ask his doctor. This is not the forum for that.
Okay. All right. So
we can't give advice for a specific medical problem because they should always talk to their doctor about it.
Sure, sir. All right. So with that, I think we will have to wind up our session for today because there's also another program that's going to start immediately. But I'm sure this talk and these discussions that we initiated today has already thrown up so many questions and made us to look forward more to the coming sessions that would look into some of these in more detail. So allow me to quickly propose a vote of thanks.
Before you finish, Rekha, many of us, especially me, might be on many of the webinars that follow after this. So you can ask us questions even later on.
Yes, later.
Or you can send the questions to you and we can reply to the questions online even on an email.
Yeah.
So don't worry if you're not answered all the questions. We can
Sure.
still answer them later on.
I have already.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to all of you. From Girish and my side, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I've already taken down their email IDs. I've asked them to post it in the chat, so we will respond to them at the earliest. So with this, we will bring this program to a close. I hope you filled up the feedback form. We are indeed very, very grateful to our esteemed speakers for taking time out and spending time to explain some simple things, but very crucial points to all of us today. This has indeed set the tone for us to have more conversations around mental health and better public health in a broader context. We express our sincere gratitude to both of you, Dr. Girish and Dr. Matthew, for sharing your time and insights with us, coming from your vast experience. We are looking forward to the coming webinars, and we will be in touch with you for further help and assistance. I also extend a heartfelt gratitude to our provincial and the management for providing us this platform to have these discussions. And thank you to all the participants for your active engagement with us this evening. We look forward to you joining our programs tomorrow and also the next Friday, Saturday in the coming weeks. We will provide the information on a daily basis. And before we close, if there's anything else that the speakers would like to say, and then we can end the meeting.
Thanks, Girish. Thanks, Samagra and Joseph. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, sir. With that, I think you can all have a pleasant evening and log off from the meeting. Thank you.